What's up, guys? How are you doing today? It's Aziz, and today we're going to be looking at how to work with Terraform to build your AWS Lambda functions, and we're also going to be having SNS and also GuardDuty inside. So basically what we're doing is we're going to write a Lambda function in Python, and what the Lambda function is going to be doing is going to be getting our GuardDuty findings, and then it's going to be sending us an SNS, publishing this to our SNS topic, right? So we can be able to receive an email anytime we have any GuardDuty findings. So without further ado, let's dive in. So this is the architecture of what we are going to be looking at. So we have our IAM role, and then we have our GuardDuty, then we have AWS ECR. So one thing is that we are going to be working with Lambda using Docker. Okay, so Lambda supports also container runtimes as well as the normal operating system runtimes where you can just run your normal source code. Right. So today we are going to be looking at how to use also Lambda by you working with our container runtime images. So and we are going to be using Docker. So in our Terraform, we are going to have everything going through Terraform. All right. So we have our SNS topic that we are going to also create by using Terraform, and then we have our ECR repository where we're going to have our image. Then SNS is going to then push the message to us through email, and then we have an IAM role that is going to basically have access. Where you always need to attach a task execution role to Lambda, and this role is supposed to have access to whatever thing that your function is going to be doing. So our role has access to GuardDuty, it has access to ECR, and it also has access to SNS. So let's go ahead and look at what we have in the source code. So I already have the source code already. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run everyone through the source code so we can understand what we have in there. So first, let's look at the Lambda function. So inside our Lambda function it's a very basic Lambda function. And what exactly are we doing in our Lambda function? So what we are doing is first we import our JSON, we import boto library because we need the boto library, and then we import the operating system, and then now we define the handler. And this function could be called anything, but you just need to remember when you're running it, you need to execute that particular function that you defined as your Lambda handler. So now after that, we now initialize our GuardDuty, our boto library object alongside with the SNS. So we define the GuardDuty and SNS both library clients, and then now what we want to do is simply just to set an environment variable to get the detector ID, because when you're working with GuardDuty, you have what we call the detector ID. So you can get this detector ID from your GuardDuty service console. If you go to GuardDuty, go down to settings, and you're going to see the GuardDuty, the detector ID. So after that, we have findings response, and then findings response is equal to GuardDuty.list findings. So we send this request get the findings, and then we can now inside these findings we are going to read the object we are going to get, and we want to get the key that is called findings. Okay. Then now after that, we now check if we actually have findings. Then what do? Then we now execute all these various steps. So we get the findings, and then we get the findings with the detector ID, and then we get the findings, and after that we now basically dump the JSON basically to restructure it very well. And then after that, we can now run the SNS response, and then we run SNS.publish to publish our SNS topic. So when doing that, also we need the SNS topic ARN, and we are going to pass all these environment variables through our Terraform. Then we pass the message, which is the message we got from the GuardDuty findings, and then we have our subject, which is GuardDuty findings alert. So if this is successful, then we are going to return status code 200, and the body is going to be this SNS notification sent successfully. Else, if we don't have any GuardDuty findings, then we are going to return 200, and this time around is going to be no GuardDuty findings at this time. So this is what our function is going to return. So after that, now we have our Docker file. So inside our Docker file, what are we doing? In our Docker file, we basically just copying the requirements.txt. Then we have our pip install. We install the requirements that we have inside our requirements.txt. So inside here, we have the boto3 library. So afterwards, then we now copy the Lambda function. We copy the function into our Docker file, and this Lambda task root is by default in the doc. So you need to, when you're copying your content from the context of the Docker image of the Docker file, you want to make sure that you use you copy it to this Lambda task root. And after that, now we create our argument for the detector ID and the SNS topic, so we can be able to pass this as Docker build arguments after. And then after that, now we reassign them now to environment variables, and then we now call our Lambda function .handler. So you can see here we call the Lambda, we call the Python function, and then we now define the exact function that we want to invoke. And inside here you can see inside the Lambda function we have our handler. The function is called handler. So that is why inside here you have Lambda function .handler. So that is it for the Docker file. Now we need to build the infrastructure. So before we build the infrastructure, what do we have? So inside our Terraform, so I created a folder called infra, and inside this folder called infra, what I have inside here is basically we have a Lambda function, lambda.cf. So we go ahead and we create a Lambda function. So using the Lambda resource, we create the Lambda function with this name. And then in creating the Lambda function, we also create an IAM role. Okay, because you're going to need the task execution role, then the image type. So for me, I'm using architecture as equal to ARM64. The reason why is because when I'm building the Docker image, I am working on a MacBook, so it's based on M1, and so that is why I need to set the architecture of the Lambda as ARM64. So if you're going to be using Windows, then you can leave it as default, or you can basically remove this, so you can use the 86 times 64. So you can basically remove this, and then I set the timeout, the Lambda timeout to 20 seconds, and then I define the image URI. So this image URI is going to be the Docker image that we are going to build and publish to ECR. So it's basically just a variable that we are getting. So first we get the repository URL, and then we have the image tag defined as a variable, and then to the Lambda function we are going to also pass the variables. We pass the detector ID and we pass the SNS topic. And then I basically say this Lambda function depends on the fact that we have already built the Docker image. So it first is going to call the Docker image.GuardDuty Lambda. So, and what do we have inside this particular inside here? So first, inside our main.cf, we're using two providers. We have the AWS provider and we have the Docker provider. So the Docker provider is going to help us to be able to build the Docker image and push to ECR. Then we use the AWS provider to create our infrastructure. So for the Docker provider, we have docker.cf. Inside docker.cf, what are we doing? First, we have defined a data source to get the authorization token for ECR, because we are going to need this for the Docker for the Docker to be able to communicate with ECR. So we have the Docker resource, Docker image, GuardDuty Lambda, and then we define the build, and then we define the context. And inside here, you can see that we are seeing that the context here is equal to path.module.dot, because we have our Docker file and our function inside one step behind. So we define this path, and then also define the path to the Docker file. Then now, because this Docker provider needs authentication credentials to be able to communicate with ECR, so we define the authentication config section, and we see that the host name is going to be equal to the ECR repository. So we see AWS ECR.lambda repo.registry ID. Okay, so we get this, and then we're saying that the authentication token, we need to assign it a token, and the token is coming from this data source. Okay, it's coming from AWS ECR authorization token. So this function here is going to get the token and is going to reassign it now to this auth, so that this Docker provider can be able to communicate with ECR. And then after that, now we have the build arguments. We also pass the build arguments. So when we're doing the Docker build, you always pass minus args. So when you're using the Docker provider, we pass the arguments using the build arg is equal to this, and then we pass the various build arguments inside here. And after that, now we also have a local exec, because we need to log into the ECR registry. So we do AWS ECR get login, password minus region is equal to that. And then for me, you need to take note of this. For me, I define minus profile is equal to Terraform user, because inside my terminal, I have defined my profile as Terraform user. So if, depending on how you've configured your AWS credentials locally, then If they are default, then you don't need to provide minus profile. But if you're using a profile, then you need to provide the profile name. Then after that, you also define the Docker login, and then we get the ECR, we get the ECR, and we get the ECR registry ID from here. After that, then we now do a Docker push, and we push the image to our ECR registry. So that is what the Docker does. After Docker is done building the image, we also have our SNS topic. So inside here, we create our SNS topic. We're using AWS SNS Topic GuardDuty alert, and then after that, now we create the subscription. So for the subscription, I've also defined the email as a variable. So if you check inside our variables.tf, you're going to see we have the AWS region, and then we have the email address. So I pass the email as a variable, and I pass everything inside my terraform.tf. So in my terraform.tf, I have the region, I have the image tag is equal to this, I have the detector ID, then I have the email address where I want SNS to publish the notifications. Then after that, you have the ECR. In ECR, we're basically just creating our ECR repository. So we create the repository for the GuardDuty, Lambda repository, where we're going to store our Docker image. And yeah, I think that is it for the Docker. So basically, what is happening? So when we're going to build the Docker is when we're going to run the Terraform apply. Terraform is going to start by creating the various basic resources like the IAM role, and then it's going to, after that, is going to create the SNS, the repository, and then after that, now we're going to run the Docker, and Docker is going to build the image, and then after that, now it then builds the Lambda function, and then after that, we will now be able to go into our console and then run a basic, and then just basically test the function to see if we're going to receive our SNS topic. So let's go ahead and execute this Terraform. So let's go ahead and run a Terraform apply. I'll just record the command. So you want to run a Terraform apply. And you want to auto approve. So I'm going to go ahead and run the Terraform. So it should be done in no time. So what I'm planning for the next demo is that we are going to update this Lambda function to dynamically always get the GuardDuty findings. Anytime we have new GuardDuty findings, we want to configure it with CloudWatch so it can be able to automatically trigger the Lambda function. So for today in the Lambda, it's just basically working once. So you trigger it and then it goes to GuardDuty and gets it. But what we want is that anytime we have a new GuardDuty finding, it should automatically trigger the Lambda function, right? So in the next demo, we are going to add this part to automatically trigger the Lambda function anytime we have our new GuardDuty findings. So let's give it a second for the Terraform apply to complete. Okay, so the Terraform is done. Now let's go ahead and go to our console and see if we have our Lambda function. So I'm going back to the console. I'm going to navigate to Lambda. So I'm already logged into my AWS account. So I'm going to refresh. And now we have our Lambda function. So let's open the Lambda function. So if you check the Lambda function, you can see it has here the image URI, which is our image that we just that is attached to our Lambda function. And then we have the test. So we can go ahead and test the Lambda function by simply just doing a quick test from here. So let's go ahead and do test. And that is it. So you can be able to also check the logs on the Lambda function. You can check on the details. You can see SNS notification sent successfully. So it's just going to take a few seconds and then you receive the notification. So I just got the notification. So if I come now to my email, you can see here, I just received the notification for my GuardDuty findings. So you can see the GuardDuty findings here. The API described region was invoked using root credentials on this particular IP address, like this. So that is it. And yeah, so that is all for today. And if you want to get the source code for this, you can basically check inside this GitHub repository. I have everything inside here, and the link to the repository is also going to be in the description. So that is all for today, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.